Hello, everybody. Welcome. It's good to be gathered here together. We are here for our bonus workshop for the month of October, and it's entitled Sex and Psychedelics, Deepening Awareness of Learning to Hold Erotic Energy in Psychedelic Therapy, with our two guests, Jahan Khamzezadeh and Leslie Grace. My name is Frederica Helmier, and I serve as the program director of the Psychedelic Practitioner Training here at Synthesis. I'm joined by Courtney Zapor. We are the hosts today, and we have other Synthesis staff with us as well. We are touching on a very complex topic in today's workshop. What do you do when sexual energies arise during ceremony? And what are some of the ways of working with it safely and ethically? And why is it so challenging to talk about sex and psychedelics? And how can we safely further the conversation and explore the necessary competencies for working with sexual energies? So in today's session, Jahan and Leslie will offer their unique perspectives on some of these questions. 90 minutes is not nearly enough time to go into the nuances of working with this topic, with sexuality, sexual activity, erotic energy that may come up in psychedelic ceremonies or in integration work. I think often, as is the case with our bonus workshops, what we're trying to pack into a very short amount of time could easily be a day-long seminar, a week-long seminar, an entire course, a lifetime of study and practice. So I want to be clear that we are just going to barely be dipping our toes into this very provocative topic. We will not be able to cover everything about it. So Synthesis references the work of Kailea Taylor, who is our ethical advisor, and we also have our code of ethics in our approach of working with sexuality during our retreats. I want to be very clear that we offer these bonus workshops as a way to feature and highlight different approaches. We bring guest speakers in to speak about their experiences. They do not necessarily reflect Synthesis's approach and thinking about these important topics. But we are in for a very provocative and insightful conversation about two of the most taboo topics that Western civilization knows, sex and psychedelics. A quick admin note, normally we disable the chat, the option to chat to everybody in these workshops, and that's just to minimize distractions for us all so we can focus on the content. But Jahan and Leslie do have a few moments when they're going to invite offerings, interactions through the chat. So you will be invited to do so. You do not have to if you don't want to. And Jahan and Leslie may be reading out loud some of the offerings in the chat. So please indicate if it's okay to share out loud. If we don't see that phrase, okay to share, then whatever you put will not be spoken into the recording of this session. And then also, please, as always is the case, the chat's available to you, but we're asking to keep distractions to a minimum so we can focus on the content. Questions today are going to Courtney, and you will find her name as Q&A Courtney. I think most of you know Courtney at this point. She will be collecting your questions, and we will hopefully have space one or two or perhaps three different times throughout the offering to pause and answer questions. So who do we have with us today? Jahan is a therapist, an author, a Synthesis content advisor with extensive academic and practical experience with psychedelic therapy and integration. Thank you, Jahan, for being with us today. Leslie Grace is a transformational guide, a conscious sexuality coach, a Tantra educator who works with various consciousness expanding modalities. So without further ado, please enjoy, critically engage with, and enthusiastically explore the wisdom of Jahan and Leslie today.
First, thank you all for joining. It's such an honor to be here to be working with each of you.
Thank you, everyone. So we're going to get started by welcoming you into a short meditation. So if you feel comfortable to join in on that, just reminding you, you're totally at choice and you're welcome to go off screen if you like, or participate to the level of your comfort. So if you're open to closing your eyes right now, I'm just going to invite you to take a few breaths into your heart. And invite you to breathe down into your belly. And I invite you to breathe all the way down to your base, down to your genitals. And just connect to this precious body of yours and the energies that are alive there. And go ahead and feeling your body as one open space. Heart, belly, genitals, all connected. And if you like, you can place a hand over your heart. You can place a hand down over your lower belly or over your genitals and really feeling the connection between these power centers of your being, this creative life force and this love that is alive in your being. And tuning into what's real for you. How do you relate to this topic of sexuality and sensuality? How does intimacy arrive in your life? Just feeling into your own beliefs and feelings about your body, your pleasure, your sexuality. You might tune into the belief systems that you were raised with, or how you might have felt safe to be yourself sexually growing up, or maybe not as much. You might connect with any shame that you have experienced throughout your life around this area, this part of you. And tuning into how this energy manifests in your life right now, whether you're single or whether you're in partnership or dating. Seeing how is your connection with your sexual energy these days? How much room do you give yourself to dance and play? How much room do you give yourself to enjoy the simple pleasures of life, the warmth of a shower, the deliciousness of a ripe berry? What role does sensuality play in your day-to-day life? What is it that you love about being a sensual being? And where are the areas where you might still have room to grow? And so just noticing any sensations or emotions that may be arising, and just welcome them fully. Taking a few more moments to just be with your body and your breath and your contemplation. And whenever you feel ready, you can, you can come back slowly to our shared space. Open your eyes, noticing how that was for you, just doing a short meditation on your own self. And if you'd like to share any reflections, anything that came up for you during that meditation, you're welcome to type some into the chat. Again, letting us know if you're okay for us to share aloud. Otherwise, you can just be with your own thoughts around it. So welcome, everyone. Yeah, we have a rich conversation today and much to get through, but I'm going to start by just kind of, greeting the reality of our times. Just really being honest, our modern culture has so many hangups around sexuality. Porn culture is rampant. So many people find themselves in sexual situations when they're inebriated or otherwise dissociated in some way. There's everyone's dealing with attachment issues, body shame. There's fewer marriages than ever. People are having less sex than ever. The religious shame that people have dealt with has been severe. There's high levels of sexual trauma in our populations, and the list goes on, right? This can be the most natural thing in the world, but we found quite a way to screw it up, huh? And so I would say that for many people, our sexuality has really been disconnected from our heart, from a core sense of who we are as a good, safe, and spiritual being. And this has caused a lot of pain for folks. And it also reflects a disconnection from nature, from the earth. And, this sense of sort of like something about me is not okay. And I don't know how to belong here in a really integrated way. So much of our modern life, we live in our head. And it's, I'd say one of the most powerful things for me about medicine work and the psychedelic space is that it really gets us out of that mind, the mind of separation and anxiety, and really lets us plunge into that deep subconscious emotional terrain that's really discovered in the body. That's really the felt sense of who we are, and getting really connected to that. And sexuality is a big part of that. So we're going to keep pointing back to the body as really the place where the real transformation can occur, and where we can feel our connection with life in that way. So yeah, I'd say all of us have had some form of shame installed in us around sex because of our culture. I certainly had the Catholic upbringing myself. So, hey, and, I was taught that sex was sin, that my body was dirty, and that was to be saved for marriage and only for making babies. And it really, as I have untangled that, those belief systems in myself, it was really about learning to trust my own body again, learning to trust my impulses, and remembering that my desires are beautiful and sacred, and really treating them as such. I think when people have been told that their desire is wrong, it tends to live in the shadows, right? So our work is really about bringing everything out into the light. And I at some point I found classical Tantra teachings and neo-Tantra teachings, and those have been really instrumental for me in learning to reconnect my sexuality with my spirituality, and with that sense of goodness, and a wholesome sense of who I am. So it's been a beautiful path of learning. Jahan, did you want to jump in on this?
Thank you for that lovely entrance into the space, Leslie. It was very warm and inviting. And, there's so many reasons why we're doing this talk. As Leslie shared, it's a natural part of our being and the evolutionary process. And also, I would say it's maybe the most tricky part of holding space therapeutically. I wrote an article earlier this year around holding erotic energy in psychedelic medicine space. And in the research, I came across a statistic that said about 5% of therapists end up sleeping with a client over the course of their career. That's 1 in 20. So without any training or deepening awareness, that'd be 1 to 2 people in this room. And what I saw, not enough different trainings had worked on the sexual development and sexual awareness and really kind of focusing on how to hold that space. And there's many reasons why. I've taken a lot of trainings in the area of holding space, but I feel a lot of people didn't even know how to approach it or talk about it. And so this has been our attempt to bring it to the forefront that this is something major and big. And in my journey of holding space, as statistics also show, about 1 in 4 people have sexual trauma. That's major. So even if people don't come in for it within the psychedelic, actual state of consciousness, it's likely to pop up to the surface. So I think it's something that we need to have a lot of framing and context around. And as many of us have been paying attention to the field of psychedelics, there has been recent allegations of abuse in this area. One of the main examples is by a couple of teachers Leslie and I trained by. And it was just another example of how sexuality and those boundaries begin to blur in the space and how it's easy for it to happen, even with people working in the space for decades, and that this is a larger systemic issue, that this happens across so many professional and spiritual communities, whether they're priests, shamans, doctors, professors, lawyers. There's a larger systemic issue of power dynamics and sexual lines being crossed. And it's so common that I feel the actual approach is more education and awareness, not pushing away, not necessarily even shaming it, because that puts things in the dark, but really bring it forward into the light to see why is this happening and how we can work to make this situation better.
Totally.
Leslie?
I absolutely agree. I feel like because, when this topic gets pushed into the shadows, that's when abuses occur. That's when things happen that are like, oh, that's not quite right. So it's, no one's immune to this. We all have our stuff. And it's just so important to be looking into those shadows and seeing what really is there for us. So you can bet that, whatever it is that your client is coming to the medicine for, that they have something to process around sexuality and intimacy. It's just, it's such a powerful area to work with because it connects to every other area of our life. And really the same can be said about you as a guide, that, probably you have some stuff to work on there. Probably you have some stuff to explore. And we're going to be encouraging you to do your own work in order to create a safer space for your clients. So this energy is just absolutely needs to be held with the utmost respect in the safest container we can possibly create, so the client can have a really positive, life affirming experience of themselves as inherently good and safe and worthy of love. So I want to name that sexual energy is such a powerful ally in our personal evolution. This is our life force. This is the juice that makes it all happen. And as we learn to tap into it and unlock that energy and let it literally flow through our bodies, flow through our energy systems, it is like the energy that's really removing blocks and allowing us to expand into our fullness. And I know that when I'm in my kind of most expansive, loving, alive state of being, it's when I'm connected to my sexual energy, and it's all flowing in a beautiful way. So we're going to be sharing more about that and our own journeys of sexual evolution and integration. We want to just make a note that these are sensitive topics, and there might be some sensitivity for certain folks in the audience. And we're going to be sharing about, terms like masculine and feminine. We'll be discussing sexual trauma. So just, take care of yourselves however you need to. We want to note that sexuality is something that is so unique to everyone, and in terms of your gender expression, in terms of your sexual orientation, and that really we want to make room for everyone's expression to be what it is, to be what it needs to be, to follow your own heart around all that. So we're not going to be giving any specific guidelines around, what should be or how you should be. So, but we will be speaking about some of these terms. So
beautiful, Leslie. And just
Yeah.
to give overall kind of context to this specific presentation, we broke it down into 3 parts. The first part's like the big picture, it's collective, working with polarity and evolution. The second gets more to the individual and personal work and seeing sexuality as a key to our wholeness. And the third is the professional realm, working directly with sexual energy while being with a client. And so in terms of the big picture, as Leslie's been leading to, like, it's a deep part of our energetic force. And whether you're looking at tantric or sense of different kind of mysticism that includes sexuality, we see sexual energy at the very birth of the universe itself, at the singularity, at the moment of the Big Bang, and it's been leading forward, this kind of creative, attractive force through atoms to come together, form molecules, come together, form cells reproducing and then coming and connecting again. And it runs through the entire animal kingdom, right? It is how we got here. Your very body was created out of sexual energy. And it's at the basis of a lot of large psychological models, at the beginning with Freud is the libido as this energy that powers your entire psyche, to Abraham Maslow's work, working in humanistic psychology. He still puts it at the bottom of the pyramid of needs, along with, food, water, and air. Right. Then you see the work of Stanislav Grof with his BPMs. It's in the middle of the death and rebirth process. So the people have gone deeply understanding human nature, see it as a deep, vibrant part of it, animates and brings aliveness to your psyche. Since 19, I've really had this huge focus on both the field of psychedelics and of sexuality. And I think they have many overlap. For me, they were a deep embodied entrance into spiritual experiences. And I think at the core part of what psychedelics try to give us a taste of and sexuality is the experience of unity. Just personally, I see unity as the main driving force of evolution. Again, bringing atoms together, the molecules and cells and the planets. It happens in relationships of couples. There's a movement within communities, right? And as you see the psychedelic literature, people tend to put the apex experience of that of unity, one with the planet, one with the universe, one with the divine, or either one just with yourself, and integrating it and creating a deeper sense of wholeness. Right. So psychedelics and sexuality are boundary dissolving. They break out our egoic personal structures to have a deeper sense of connection with somebody else, generally giving a deep sense of love and of freedom and of wholeness. I've personally seen this thread of pleasure as this kind of energy that helps bring us to a sense of home within our very being. Leslie?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll say that, for myself, my deepest psychedelic experiences are the ones that have been intensely erotic, intensely orgasmic, boundary dissolving, unifying with God, with creation, and really feeling this like vibrant energy alive in my being. So, when I first got introduced to ceremonial work with psychedelics, it was when I had a profound sexual awakening, and really like took notice of like, okay, wow, this energy has such a deeper purpose. It has such a deeper possibility. And in those states of ecstatic openness, it's like I really get to feel that fabric of the universe as orgasmic, as like full of delight, as like pure love, pure vibrancy and aliveness. So helping our clients to connect with that and helping them free that part of themselves is such a gift and such a service to their life.
Yes. Just to echo what she shared, that in my deepest moments of, you could say, mystical or spiritual kind of rapture, it was deeply erotic by its nature. And there's an experience I had at the age of 18 that radically shifted my life. And I've talked about it at length at the beginning of my book and podcast, so I'll only go so far deeply here. But there's a sense of dying and dissolving. And when I let myself kind of move past this kind of threshold into the unknown, there's a sense of hugely expanding to take up the entire stadium. I was at a concert seeing my favorite band, Tool, and emerging with the divine. And this was radically different than anything I'd known, because I was an atheist at the time, suicidal and depressed. And in this sense of deep interconnection with every part of the cosmos, I felt as if my body, every cell inside my being was having an orgasm. It was rejoicing in love and celebrating, right? And so there was a sense that this deep ecstatic state was a part of our nature. And as deep as I've gone with meditation and other practices, anytime I've been able to open to that realm, it was as if my whole body was moving more into an orgasmic kind of erotic and ecstatic state, For example, like the Hindus even believe that our truest nature is bliss. So there's a sense of vibrancy at such a large frequency that really brings us into freedom and opens our being to everything else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If you feel comfortable typing something into the chat box around your own experiences of sexual energy in the psychedelic space, we'd be happy to hear what you have to share. So feel free to do that. Yeah, I want to name that that on the planet right now, in our world, we're experiencing a bit of a crisis of, sort of disconnection from the planet, but this can be seen as, an imbalance in the masculine and feminine forces of reality that, we've gotten so focused and driven and, so many people living in their heads, we're really disconnected from our body, from our sense of really feeling what feels right for us as a people, as a collective. And let's face it, psychedelic experience really connects us to the planet, to nature, to the sense of collective unfolding. So I really feel like psychedelics are bringing us into that, more of that like pleasurable, like the life that we could all be living.
Yeah. And to really kind of ground this again in our deep history, because right now we're so trapped in our moment. And it gives so much context of how to view sexuality, but it had always been so. And as Leslie mentioned, it's so deeply natural to our being and runs through the entire animal kingdom. In my dissertation research, I spent a lot of time looking at prehistoric humanity and the process of evolution with the role that psychedelics and sexuality plays. There's a great book called Sex at Dawn. I highly recommend. The subtitle is The Prehistory of Modern Sexuality. And they really look at our hunter-gatherer ancestors and even deeper, our primate ancestors, and see the role sex played. And one way they do this is to really look at the bonobos, who, along with the chimpanzees, are our closest genetic living relatives, right? We share like 8% genetic material with the bonobos. And they can be a model for how our hunter and gatherer ancestors revolved around sexuality. So bonobos have sex about 14 times a day. Largely a matriarchal culture. They use sexuality to ease tension, build social relationships. And so it's a very complex framework. So if we look at our hunter and gatherer ancestors before the agricultural revolution, we were in groups of like 75 to 150 people roaming from place to place, not wearing clothes. And a lot of research shows that monogamy itself rose as part of the agricultural revolution about 10,000 years ago. So there's about 4 million years when we're about humans roaming the African savannas. And imagine when it's nighttime and it's cold, the best thing you have to keep warm is being body to body. So large part likely of our sexual history, we're talking about the very container that formed our emotional beings, was likely more like cuddle puddles. Right. And you can still see a lot of similar kind of more non-monogamous. Actually, it seems to be within what the Sex and Dawn shows that there's only one primate species that is monogamous. So largely non-monogamy, meaning that there's open sexual connections to anybody in the group and tribe is a part of our natural history. And to really anchor this with the role that psychedelics might have had, a lot of my dissertation work was on the work put forward by Terence and Dennis McKenna, that we evolved because of the relationship with psilocybin mushrooms. And I think there's a lot of credit to this, being that there's consciousness expanding compounds in almost all ecosystems, right? That really play a role in, you could say, social and cognitive development. And as Paul Stamets, a mycologist, notes, the most common mushroom in the Africa savannas were evolved is a psilocybin variety. Terence McKenna says that this dose and relationship with the mushroom would have worked in 3 different stages. At the lowest dose, psychologists have found out that psilocybin increases visual acuity, specifically depth perception. So colors become more vibrant and you can tell the difference between other objects. Our visual sense being our most powerful form of our senses. So for example, this would have helped us see snakes in the grass by distinctly seeing different colors of green, right? Or it would have helped us hunt better and be more attuned to what's happening in the environment. It also increases a sense of restlessness and arousal, stimulating our nervous system, almost like a little bit of caffeine, so we've been more productive. At the second stage of dosing, maybe 1 or 2 mushrooms, it increases sexual arousal. So the primate group that would have been taking psilocybin would have been copulating more, growing more in size, right? And studies have also shown that psilocybin increases a sense of empathy, connecting us even deeper and bonding with the group. Jeremy Rifkin, the sociologist, points out in his book, The Empathic Civilization, it was our ability to cooperate, not competition, that allowed us to really evolve. We can coordinate, work together as a group, deepening with language, and work as one organism, as opposed to pitting ourselves just against others within our species. At higher doses, we would have had mystical experiences, as studies have shown since the 1960s using psilocybin, that under the right set and setting, 65% of people have a mystical experience. This would have been just as true with our ancestors. Again, these mystical experiences being partly erotic, connecting with nature in a deeper sense of self, taking our consciousness outside of our senses of sight, smell, taste, and touch into a deeply imaginable realm, connecting with the divine, giving birth possibly to the experience of religion itself. And in the last 10 years, MRI studies have shown now that psilocybin creates a hyper-connected brain state and it stimulates neurogenesis, the growth of new neurons. The brain physically begins to grow. So the idea is this happened for generations, for millions of years possibly, leading to the creation of humanity, creating these brain states, giving us the hardware to have mystical experiences, but also to deeply empathically connect within each other. Leslie, jump in. Oh, you're on mute right now.
Oh,
yeah,
you had really talked about the drives of evolution. I wondered if you could say more about that.
Totally. Thank you so much. I've also been really focused on this idea since the teen of how and why do psychedelics exist, given that they're so profound, produce complex states of consciousness, both in our emotions and our visual experiences. And I think to really understand them, we have to see them within an ecological framework. Why do they grow in so many ecosystems? Why there's 200 different species of psilocybin mushrooms? And I think a deep insight comes from the work of Richard Doyle. He was a Pennsylvania State professor working in the area of literature and technology, and he read thousands of trip reports for his book called Darwin's Pharmacy, Sex, Plants, and Evolution of the Noosphere. And what he found out of all his research, that the prime signature insight using psychedelics is that the participant realizes they're part of a vast interconnected living system. And he said they should be retermed ecodelics. So now we're putting this information in. We see plants within and fungi within the ecosystems that actually produce ecological consciousness, meaning we're parts within a whole, that we're deeply interconnected, right? So a big reason perhaps that the plants do this is to regulate the consciousness within the environment. The same way within your body, there's compounds that regulate and try to create a state of homeostasis chemically. Plants tend to talk chemically, right? So we have this compound that tends to produce empathy, connection, religious experience, creativity, really pushing evolution forward.
Mm-hmm. And really in our culture, both sexuality and drugs have been shamed, have been, pushed into the shadows. And, these may be the greatest catalysts for humanity's creativity, for moving toward collective freedom. I mean, they share a very common drive toward that state of connectedness and pleasure and ecstasy. And I think that the abundant, juicy, alive, sustainable world that we all want is going to be very sex positive, is going to be very psychedelic positive. And I think that that's the direction that we're all moving in. So as we wrap up the section, just wanted to make some room for Q&A. So if there's any questions that people have, if they want to type them in, you can send those in, and I believe Courtney is going to be sharing any of those questions. So
yeah, and because of just timing, we're going to answer your questions at the end of our entire talk, but please put them in while they're fresh so we can return to them.
Great. So moving on to our second part of our presentation around really, your personal connection to sexuality and how important that sexual integration is to our wholeness. It's really such a key to finding ourselves as a full, alive, connected being. So I want to name that sexual energy really has many different healing functions, but there's kind of two primary functions that I want to speak to. There's there's like the way that sexual energy connects us to the greater spiritual whole, to a sense of oneness. It heals that kind of ontological emptiness, the spiritual split, disconnection between self and God and the universe. And then on another level, there's healing the human level of disconnection, disconnection from ourself, from our body, from, you know, a sense of easeful connection with other humans, from our power, from our knowing. So there's these two really different levels that it works on, but the two really go hand in hand as well. So I will say that sexuality is just an inherent and essential part of our wholeness. It gives us our vitality, our creativity. It's our life force. It's what drives us. It's what makes us feel, you know, our own power moving through the world. And really, we're advocating this power that's aligned with our heart. You know, I feel like when we're like a turned on being, we're in our power, we're in our heart, then we're inspired to make positive shifts. And so we really want to invite everyone listening to, like, if you have not yet really harnessed your own sexual energy and stepped into it fully and aligned it with all these different areas of your life, that it's one of the most powerful ways that you can choose to really like animate your being and become that like greatest force of change on the planet.
Beautiful. And as we mentioned before, I believe the main impulse in the cosmos is towards unity. And there's always greater levels of unity. As I mentioned, atoms come together from molecules, molecules together cells, us with other partners, us with the universe, right? And so when we think about wholeness, wholeness is a form of unity, right? There's a sense of wholeness to the circle. Wholeness also includes meaning the parts that have been disintegrated or fragmented coming together to create a bigger whole within our very being. Okay. So as the great, psychedelic researcher Stanislav Grof, who'd been doing work in the field for 60 years and held space for 50,000 different people in these states, he said psychedelics catalyze what he calls holotropic states of consciousness, states that self-agonize and organically move towards wholeness, right? So you put this person in this big expanded container, their system self-organizes to bring to the surface anything that had been fragmented or not integrated. And a large time what this included is sexual energy. As we've shared within our culture, it's been shamed, it's been pushed away, it is not talked about. And so all that repression of a life force tends to come up, especially if there's sexual trauma, right? So as you keep the person psychedelics and the whole system begins to energetically and emotionally reorganize, you're likely going to be able to see the sexual energy come up. And I think a key thing to pointing out is if you're not comfortable with it, because people can see it, they won't talk about it, but you could see it in their body movement and the way they lick their lips and the way they move, the way they're very alive. And as Leslie was mentioning, it's a potent form of vitality. So sexual energy, when we integrate it, brings us a deep sense of presence, of connectedness, of pleasure, of yumminess, of aliveness, right? So A.H. Almus, the writer of about 20 books on spiritual development, he wrote this book on Eros and started the Diamond Heart. He says sexual energy runs through all currents of all connections at any time, even between family members, because it's a part of our spiritual being. And just because we feel sexual energy doesn't mean we have to act on it, but if we allow it in our system without pushing it away, we are more present in the connection, and there's a sense of pleasure of connecting with every being that we're with.
Yeah, really at the core of the therapeutic and spiritual work that we're doing is we're working with transforming our identity from a wounded sense of self that's disconnected, that's feeling shame or judgment about oneself, and into a greater state of wholeness. So both sexuality and psychedelics really move into that wholeness and an integrated space of aliveness. As many of us know, talk therapy only goes so far, staying in the mind, talking about things. What the client really needs is real contact with their body intelligence, getting into the body and being able to listen to its messages. And pleasure is one of the things that really can help to relax the body, letting in that sense of peace and safety. And when there is that openness, then there can be healing. So it's beautiful that these sacred medicines allow us to relax into that pleasure, to relax into that greater space for our healing to arise. Really working with somebody in a sexually heightened state is very similar to working with someone on MDMA, for example. It's There's this heightened sexuality. It allows trauma to be released from the body. It allows the deep memories to be released. It's in tantric healing work, for example, sexual healing work, where no substances are used. It's, pleasure is the modality that's allowing those things to arise. So, in a way, tantric healing work and work with psychedelics is very similar. I used to do hands-on sexual healing work as my past chapter of work, and I saw many of the same kinds of trauma releases and openings, and really like spiritual connection as well. So we really believe that, Jahan and I have both taken Tantra trainings and really done a lot of work in our own selves to integrate this energy. And we absolutely would encourage y'all to, do your own work, do your own digging into these topics.
Yeah. She mentioned, how deeply it works with the identity, and also the similarity between the MDMA state and, you can say, deep sexual arousal. As we've seen with MDMA, people tend to feel safer and pleasurable, and allows them to open up, right? So same thing if you put somebody kind of with a tantric session, and that's not what we're encouraging here, but to liken it, if the body's deeply aroused, it brings up a deep sense of safety, and then there's more resources to work with the traumatic work. Right. So if you've been looking at Abraham's model, I'm sure and hope we're all familiar with, at the bottom of the stage, there's things around, he puts food, air, water, sex, and then safety, and then belonging, and then connection and self-esteem. The sexual energy tends to meet all those needs, right? When we're deeply connected sexually within ourselves and just feeling that aliveness in the world, we tend to feel a deeper sense of belonging, a deeper sense of connection, and more self-esteem. This life force really moves up to meet a lot of the psychological deficiencies many of us feel. So a large reason I've worked with clients, and I think it's going to be very similar to a lot of us, is depression. I think it's the UN said it's the largest rising epidemic of why people are being incapacitated, right? So we could see depression is just growing all around the world. And what I have seen at the root of depression, if I really had to narrow it down, is a fragmented sense of identity. Specifically, I'm not enough and I'm not good. And if you're formed to be a being that you don't like and feels enough, reality is inherently painful. You're forced to be somebody you don't like being in a situation that you don't like. So shame keeps forming and forming and forming. And many of us maybe would agree that have had either spiritual experiences or worked on development, that our true nature is love. It's a deep divine interconnection with everything. And so people tend to have the fragmented, illusionary sense of self if I'm broken. And so the core of really healing that is dissolving that identity and seeing that they are part of this large love. And I think many of us would agree, love tends to be the main healing, attractive force, meaning attracting all the fragmented parts within of us that really helps us kind of come to a deeper sense of wholeness. Leslie?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so overall, I feel like people really need access to this energy to be able to let it flow through their bodies. It's healing on so many levels. I wanted to hear you share about your story, actually, around depression and your sexual energy, how that link.
Yeah. There's so many. I mean, the first time I took MDMA, it's like deeply realized I was a sexual being, and I was like, how is this hidden from me? I mean, I'd masturbated, I had sex, but it's realizing it's a part of my essence at all moments. And there's another experience that really stands out, and it was in a group guide ceremony using 5-MeO DMT. And during the ceremony, I was just filled with life forces. Just like the whole universe was injected. I mean, feeling confidence, elation, power, all goodness. And as I was being filled with this, I started to get an erection, right? Because my body's being filled with life force. And then because of realizing of the container I was in, I was like, oh no, this isn't appropriate to have an erection right here. And so what I did was cut off my life force so that, out of shame of being seen a certain way. And as soon as I cut off that sexual life force, my whole being deflated and I fell into depression. And there was a deep sense of loss. Like I had lost being filled with this beautiful medicine, completely out of shame because of being seen in my sexual expression.
Mm-hmm.
Just to go show, I think as soon as we cut that off, because even within you could see the Hindu system of the chakras, the energy starts at the bottom and fills your entire being. Once you cut off that source, the energy loss is felt through your entire energetic system.
Right.
Leslie, I know you
And
have
many people live in a state of their sexual energy being disconnected from their whole being. And, it's kind of, for a lot of people, it's just a genital based experience and it kind of stays there. And that's just where the energy goes. And really like through our training and through our, just our own explorations, getting to feel that energy animating the entire body, animating the full, all the chakras, all the, every cell in your body. That's what the kind of possibility that we're talking about with this energy. It's amazing to me that my deepest sexual experiences have been quite psychedelic, and my deepest psychedelic experiences have been quite sexual. And I think that that's not a mistake. There's something going on with all that. So we're just going to share a few stories from our own life and some client stories as well. I want to share about a time I was on LSD. I had been doing a lot of dancing at a festival, and I was just back in my tent, and I was just feeling my sexual energy. I was just breathing into my lower chakras. I was just allowing that energy to flow through my body, and really feeling this energy building and expanding. And I had this like beautiful spontaneous release of amrita, female ejaculate, just kind of flowed out of my body, and some kind of like orgasmic opening that I was like, wow, I've never experienced anything like that before. There's so many things that can happen in these states that are sort of beyond explanation, and can only really be experienced by opening up to them. And want to know, Jahan, what did you want to share?
Totally. What comes to mind is the impact of my very first kind of weekend Tantra training. And within a lot of that tradition, it's best for the male itself not to completely ejaculate, to kind of reserve the energy. And so some of the practices is building sexual energy, sometimes hours a day, through self-pleasure, masturbating, but also sending love throughout your entire body. And so, I set myself to a 2-week experiment of, I'm going to do these exercises 3 hours a day, completely fill myself with love. And then, move into the process of like, intentionally, I'm going to ejaculate. And the way you kind of do it within that system is you squeeze the pelvic muscles, you breathe in really heavy, fast, and move the energy up to your brain. And when I did that, it was the most intense 2-3 minute, just strong orgasm, as if somebody puts 50,000 volts of electricity into my brain, and I was riding on a roller coaster, as if like all of a sudden I was shot up with like a lot of LSD, just here and now, just super fucking intense. But it really anchored in my being how real this energy is and how we can cultivate it and work with it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sorry to interrupt. You guys asked me to remind you when we have about 20 minutes left for the lecture before we go into the 20-minute Q&A.
Okay.
20-minute Q&A.
Okay, we'll probably move to 10-15 minute Q&A just to get through this. Thank you, Courtney.
Another story that I wanted to share was from my very first experience with ayahuasca in 2009. I had a kind of spontaneous Kundalini awakening experience that was that just felt like fire energy just moving through the core of my being, and it was intensely erotic. It was intensely pleasurable, and I was just allowing my body to open up to it. This energy moved up through my body and kind of like burst out of my third eye with this sort of like Gnostic understanding of the creative force of life and how I was a part of that. And these states are tremendously powerful. And while we may only touch those for a moment, it leaves a deep impression of what's possible and where we can go. So let's move along to some case studies, if that's okay. I wanted to share about a client that I've been working with for about 1.5 years now, who has been dealing with childhood sexual trauma. She sort of knew about it, but really hadn't discovered the fullness of it. And in some of her MDMA journeys, she was able to really recall clear memories of the abuse and really, through being able to understand what had happened, she was able to sort of move through it and even begin to find forgiveness. But in her most recent journey, she's been able to sort of reclaim her own body and reconnect to her pleasure in a way that feels really right and good and like aligned for her. She recently did a couples journey with her partner, and in that they were able to really find a space of exploration of the energy without her needing to move too fast or try to get to the end or quickly like get it out of the way, but more like relaxing into it and opening up to that force within her and finding her way to work with her energy. And it was just so beautiful to be able to witness her exploring that in a safe way. And so we'll talk more about how we work with the energy professionally, but in that space, I felt safe to create a space for her and her partner to really explore some touch and erotic energy and just see what felt right in the moment. So it was really a beautiful healing opportunity.
Beautiful. No, thanks, Leslie. Out of all the clients and sessions I've done, what I found is that sexual trauma has been the most impactful and painful that people have gone, also in the sense that it has affected every part of their lives. I think it is more rampant than a lot of us have been able to realize, especially in childhood with family members or friends of families. And it'll affect their entire self-esteem, their sense of intimacy with others, the contraction of life force, sense that there's damage and something's wrong with them. I've seen it ruin marriages, and I've seen it to lead to a tremendous amount of addiction. And so there's been several clients that come to mind, but a general pattern of what I've seen is that people come in for one thing, like alcoholism. They can't stop drinking. They need to drink every day. Or they're addicted to work. They've just worked nonstop. And they come in, and within the first session, what they find at the core was that there's deep childhood sexual trauma, sometimes repressed. It's been the main repressed memory I've seen where they completely didn't know about it. That comes in, the memory clicks, and all of a sudden their entire life makes sense. Why they turned out the way they did, why they show up the way they do. And so underneath it is tremendous amount of pain, a lot of shame, a lot comes up. It's also packaged, really condensed within their emotional system. And what I've seen many times, just that one release of all that trapped energy overnight has led to the stopping of drinking or those addictive patterns. It's completely changing their life trajectory. And I don't think they would have ever gotten to. These are people that have been doing therapy for sometimes 10 or 20 years. And talk therapy wasn't to get there. But this moving to release those energetic blocks and trapped memories helped reorganize their entire life and the relationships around them.
Mm-hmm. And when people have sexual trauma, it causes them to really disconnect from their bodies many times, to feel almost like all the energy that's lower in the body kind of gets contracted, and there's kind of like a bracing away from the lower energy centers, and actually their energy system gets very imbalanced. So all the energy gets upwardly displaced, kind of diffuse, kind of spacey, sometimes a lot of mental anxiety and energy. So literally you can help guide your clients, like, when there's that kind of like tension and pulling up of energy and all this over here. And it's so important to do the grounding practices to come back into the body and to re-inhabit oneself in a safe way. So we'll be sharing more about how to work with that. So let's move on to our next section. Again, if you have any questions, go ahead and just type them in. We'll save them for the end. So our last section is going to be really, how do you work with sexual energy in psychedelic space? And much of what we're going to share is from working one-on-one with clients. In that setting, of course, integrity is of the utmost importance because it is such an intimate space. And there's a lot more room in those settings for people to explore their sexual energy. In group spaces, obviously, there's not as much opportunity for that. And generally, people are asked to keep their clothing on. There's not as much overt sexual energy expressed. Or permission to explore self-touch or that kind of thing. So just whatever kind of space you're going to be holding for people, it's just important for you to be sexually aware and to gain comfort with this energy yourself in order to navigate whatever situations may arise, and really to be able to promote the healthy, appropriate expression of sexuality in your clients. So becoming sexually aware is so important for the psychedelic practitioner. We really recommend you get some training in somatic therapy if you don't already have that. how to work with the body, how to work with, how these energies are trapped within our soma. We also really recommend you get some level of Tantra training or other sexuality training, just to do your own work, and really to, so that you feel comfortable and safe when these energies arise. It's so clear that the client is only going to really open up to the depth that they feel safe with you, and they'll be comfortable if you're comfortable. I mean, I've had spaces where my clients kind of like starting to feel this turn on coming up, and they kind of look at me and they're like, is this okay? And I'm like, yeah, like it's totally good for you to just be in that and feel it. Like, but if I was feeling tense and kind of my own stuff coming up and shame and I don't know, then it might not be a space where they felt safe to do that.
So I think people can sense safety the same way animals around can sense whether somebody's safe or there's a charge there. I think a lot of experience with dogs or other animals being able to feel empathically through resonance of what's going on within other energetic systems. Unconsciously, people are the same with each other. People can sense integrity and safety. And the only way for that to be authentic is to be in integrity as much as you can your whole life. So there's a solidity. It's not all of a sudden you're going to change to play a certain different role when you're in the medicine space. If anything, it's just like people become more sensitive to picking everything up. And so it's a deep authenticity of your being, of living a certain way that allows a deep structured solidity for people to really let go. Right. So be in high integrity around sexuality, but also between all your habits, right? You're there as a guide to be a role model. And the only way you can do that is to live a life that serves as a kind of model for the participant.
Absolutely. So really examining your own issues around sex, your own fears, your own shame, the ways that you might feel hungry for connection or, wanting to, needing support in that way. And so we're going to talk about how sexuality can show up in sessions. I mean, so many different ways, but, obviously these energies are often associated with the root chakra, the second chakra, kind of these lower energy centers of the body. People can move through all sorts of range of emotions. Oftentimes, people will do some deep breathing or sounding, or they'll start to move, or, maybe want to dance or shake, or perhaps people will be caressing their own body, just like feeling their own self. People can move into, full states of energy orgasm, like not even with any kind of genital stimulation, but just like, the waves of orgasmic energy moving through their body. They may turn into an animal and feel comfortable to express, their feline self, or maybe a wolf or a snake, or, kind of feel that animal connection to that primal power. Perhaps they may experience, divine beings or goddesses, or, that kind of sensual nourishment. They can have Kundalini experiences with energy moving through the spine, which can be either gentle or very intense, and just allowing space for those things to unfold. People may experience fantasies. They may experience memories of past partnerships, their first boyfriend or girlfriend. They may kind of revisit those early sexual experiences. They may have past life experiences of being someone of the opposite gender. There's like literally no end to the possibilities of how these energies can show up.
Yeah, it's just to share. I've had 2 different psychedelic experiences where I look down, and I'm a Black lesbian, right? So I look down, I'm Black, I'm a female, and I still like females. And so there's a sense of, again, can be so boundary dissolving and bring a deep sense of empathy with all of humanity by becoming different beings. What I found is about 90% of people, whether they know it, they come in to work on self-esteem, right? Because if you have more self-esteem, you're less anxious, you're less depressed. It's one of, Maslow's main needs. And it's a predecessor to self-actualization. You need to feel a deeper, good enough sense of self to actually actualize who you are. And when people are filled with being empowered, there tends to be a sexual current running through the sense of feeling a deep amount of power. And I think something nice to point out is I've worked with a lot of clients where they come in and they have positive, good experiences, but they're wrestling inside because they're like, I'm here to do the work, as if the work is supposed to be painful and hard and struggling. What I've actually found working with people in deep trauma and agony, PTSD states, is that actually the positive experiences have been more healing. A lot of us have trauma from missing experiences, of not having positive experiences earlier in life and being neglected, not necessarily just being shamed or abused. And so what I've seen is actually the influx of deep, pleasurable states has had more positive impact than sitting there working with all the darker emotions like guilt and shame. And it's not to move things into any actual direction yourself. The medicine itself brings up what is needed, and you're there to validate and encourage whatever the medicine is bringing up.
Great. So our guidelines, things to be aware of, this is sort of the way that we approach working with clients around this area. So you can, choose what works well for you, but in our preparation sessions, we'll often talk to clients about their sexuality, traumas they may have experienced, shame, different relationships that have had a big impact on them. And when we'll talk about how this energy can arise in journey space and how we will handle it together, we make certain agreements, we make certain rules around how we'll show up, and we set appropriate boundaries. And so that really has to be done in the preparation so that these things are really clear, that we can speak about them ahead of time.
Yeah. What I found is the three most important boundaries to also share at the beginning of each ceremony, every time, no matter how many times the person comes, is number one, don't hurt yourself, me, or the environment. So no violence anywhere towards yourself or anything else. Two is don't leave the space. You're under my supervision, under my care. I'm responsible for you. People move into like a very childlike state, right? So they need to be cared for in that kind of way. And three is I won't touch you sexually, right? And so that brings a tremendous amount of safety that the person can, whether address, touch themselves, whatever is going on. We've already created a strong, solid container. And then I say within the boundaries of this container, there's a lot of room for you, for all of your emotions, for so much expressions, for tremendous amount of freedom. So these three things, they're very simple, but really are fairly comprehensive of what to not and what to not do, and actually what's also allowed.
Mm-hmm. Right. So what do we do when sexual energy arises? What is appropriate as the guide? I mean, you as the guide, if your client is turned on, is feeling that energy flowing, your body is like a tuning fork. It's very likely that you will also tap into that feeling, to that sense of turn on. This is totally okay. It doesn't mean that you need to do anything with that energy. It's just a noticing, like, oh, wow, there is arousal in the space, and you are feeling it. Just the way, like, if your client was feeling a deep sadness, that you might, deeply feel that with them and empathize. So sexual energy is no different. It's just more about how do we hold that. So the guide really needs to feel comfortable to be encouraging of sexual energy, while also being aware of where the boundaries are, and that the focus of the session is really on the client. I'm going to just talk briefly about consent, and just say that consent is not something that is able to be given while a client is in an expanded state. So if you've talked ahead of time about how that energy might arise, or the kind of boundaries that you're going to hold, maybe around touch, or what feels appropriate, absolutely don't change the plan in the middle of the session. If somebody is turned on, that's an expanded state, and some people consider that that's also not a state where people are able to give consent. If you as the guide are feeling turned on by your client during a session, that's also a state where you are not thinking totally clearly. So I really want to impress that having clear agreements and sticking with them is of the utmost importance. So what can you do to support a client's sexual opening? We want to divide this into a few sections. Green light. Okay, what can you do? These are the things that are absolutely open to everyone. You can be that space of permission for them to follow their own impulses, to celebrate their explorations of their body. You can give them options around, what they might like to do if that felt good for them, things that you might be comfortable, witnessing or allowing, but try not to lead them too much or suggest that they do a thing, but sort of like make some menu options can be available. Mostly people just need permission to be themselves and to feel safe to express themselves. Some other things that are really easy to offer are encouraging your client in taking deep breaths, in letting that energy out, letting some sound out, allowing themselves to move. Sometimes people just need to know that it's okay to get into their animal and kind of allow that to come through. And oftentimes I will help to demonstrate that kind of breath for a client so they can kind of get into it, or they can, as they're sounding, maybe I'll do a little bit of sounding with them to sort of encourage, whatever wants to come out is totally okay. I might play sensual music or offer that they can get up and dance if they'd like to. That could be totally welcome. So those things are all really safe ways to encourage this energy. Then we move into some of the kind of yellow light territory. This is like, okay, if it feels comfortable for you, if you have adequate training, if you have adequate consent ahead of time, you and your client are welcome to decide kind of what feels right. And I'll just mention that this is how I do my practice, but everyone's going to have their own limitations, their own comfort levels. So in the yellow light category, things that could be helpful, but require caution, you might be able to do some body work to help get the energy of your client flowing. So one of the things I might do is grab my client's feet and just kind of help slosh their legs around to get those undulations going in their body. And it's a very, it's non-sexual touch, but it kind of is encouraging of that kind of free flow of energy in the body. Another way could be sort of pressing on their shoulders and kind of start to get that opened up. I think that just getting that flow of energy moving in the body is so important. In the past, I've also, done some wrestling with clients, for example, getting into kind of playful animal spaces, kind of feeling that power and that playfulness in the animal body. I will often cuddle clients in the session, holding them, nurturing way, or but this is really something that not everyone's going to feel comfortable with, and it really should be done on a case-by-case basis, like where it feels appropriate. So you have to know what's right for your practice. A lot of people want to take off their clothes while on psychedelics. There's this great desire to be free. I mean, I know for myself, whenever I take 5-MeO, DMT, I am like, okay, I need to be in this cosmic orgasmic state with the universe. And oh my God, my socks are just like, I gotta get my socks off and I gotta get my shirt off and I gotta just be free to be in that energy. So it's great if you as the guide have the spaciousness to let people do that and kind of have that freedom. But if you don't feel comfortable, it's okay for you to have your own boundary around what feels right for you. It's important not to shame the client about what their impulses are, but just to let them know where your boundaries are. Jahan?
Thank you. Yeah, and just to share and create a contrast of who we are as guides come in and affects the session. I'm a 6 foot tall, fairly large male, and I'm holding that in awareness coming in with whether it might be projected on me or kind of framework of what's happening within society. And so personally, even though I'm trained in very different tantric modalities and somatic psychotherapy, I've really had pulled away from a lot of touch, especially if it's just not necessary. So myself, if sexual energy is present, I don't touch the client. I found I'm still very effective keeping a little bit more distance. A lot of people often want to take off their clothes, and if it's a one-to-one session, I'm comfortable with that. At the same time, I've created some boundaries around masturbating is a little bit too far. So out of air for my protection and for not letting anything happen that can be misinterpreted, I've created some distance. If I was a female, maybe I'd have more freedom because there'd be less, you could say, risk on my end. So just coming in, I think feeling very professionally also protected in your stance around this. I also want to quickly just kind of sharing, because it's some practical information of the way different substances themselves may relate to sexual energy. Something we've seen is, MDMA creates a deep sense of feeling more sensual, connected to your body, heart open. It's not generally not as transpersonal, but more personal. So there's a lot more likely to feel that kind of energy all rise to the surface as people's hearts begin to open and they feel safe. Mushrooms, LSD and 5-MeO tend to have more of a large cosmic unity and sense of like a larger level of sometimes divine erotic energy that come up. It's still personal. Says the transpersonal includes the personal, it's just a little beyond it. And what we've seen with ketamine is there could be a lot of opening to energy, but not necessarily sexual energy. There's a large sense of flow. But something we have seen that I think people that have experimented recreationally is that something like ketamine and a large amount of MDMA, it's actually hard for males to be erected, which have a sense of an erection. Again, so dosing is dependent on how much sexual energy is available, but doesn't necessarily constrict opening to large spiritual dimensions. And as a small side note, something that I think might be helpful to the future of therapy in this area, as many people know, Alexander Shulgin, he was the chemist, the kind of godfather of MDMA, and him and his wife Anna brought MDMA to psychotherapy. Believe that 2CB, one of his top 5 compounds along with MDMA, in combination with MDMA would play a big role in the future of psychotherapy. And Anne Shulgin, his wife, shared that she found 2CB to be one of the most erotic compounds and, has been cited for saying she's had 5 orgasms while on 2CB.
And I'll just name that also GHB is a compound that can be really helpful in helping people to unlock their sexual energy and get more out of the head and get more into that primal earthiness of their body. This one is very controversial and definitely needs to be used with caution, but I just wanted to name that one as well. So in terms of, how we can support people, our guidelines is that the guide stays fully clothed at all times and that the guide avoids any kind of stimulation or raising of their own sexual energy if possible. If I have a client that wants to self-pleasure, masturbate, I will let them know they're free to do that. And I'm not going to be involved, but I can either stay in the room or I can leave the room and give them some space to do that. There are times when it can be really beneficial for a client to explore themselves in session in that way. It's a really beautiful use of the time and of the space. In other cases, if I feel like, oh, it's actually a distraction from their deeper material, then I will discourage that kind of self-touch. So things to think about there. Where we get into the red light as the guide. Okay, red light, where's the line? Where is actually, hey, if something feels off in the session, it probably is. I would say that for the vast majority of those listening on this call, the truth is that you are not your client's sexual healer, and you do not need to try to support them in areas that you don't feel comfortable or that you don't have training. So our guidelines are absolutely no sexual touch in any way from you to the client. And never under any circumstances is it okay to kiss a client, to engage in sexual exchange or romantic projection fantasies, to touch them in ways that bring you pleasure. Whether any of those activities seem to be consensual or not, it's just a hard line. I would even say if you have an attraction to a potential client that you already feel like, oh, there's energy here, I would say go ahead and pass them on to another practitioner. So we're really like bringing in a sense of impeccability. We have to absolutely hold these boundaries with the utmost of clarity, and we're really role modeling for our clients. So this is a sacred container for healing. And we really need to uphold those boundaries that allow them to be in their sexual innocence and safety. So if the client asks for some kind of touch or connection from you that feels safe and good and right for you, please go ahead and provide it. If they ask for something that you feel uncomfortable about or hesitant, that might be a good sign to steer clear or redirect them, or ask them to explore where that impulse is coming from. if they're making a lot of eye contact with you, or, you know, kind of coming out of their experience to direct their energy in your direction, that might be an opportunity to let them go back inside and take that energy back inside, perhaps putting on the eye mask and kind of getting out of that focus on you and back focusing on themselves. So anything you want to add to that, Jahan?
Yeah, just to share how natural attraction is, from a cosmological and tantric perspective, it's as natural as having a positive and negative charge, whether it's in atoms or batteries, right? That creates a sense of attraction, electricity. So there's nothing to shame there, but you are responsible for how you hold that energy. And as many of us have come to see, that boundaries are really at the heart of healthy relationships, all relationships, parent to child, lover, business, definitely therapeutic and client. And boundaries create the structure of the dynamic, right? That's what has to be honored. As soon as those boundaries are broken, the entire thing of safety stops. Right? The person from now on can't trust you fully. It's going to have huge ripples of effect within your personal life, professional life, and that client's life. So for the sake and health of the longevity of this connection, those boundaries must be maintained. And to really kind of start moving and ending on the idea of transference and countertransference, where there could be a lot of energetic interplay going back and forth unconsciously. There's definitely a lot of space for clients to fall in love with you. They many times will be like, I've never felt so open with somebody, so vulnerable, so safe, because their consciousness has opened up in a way they haven't experienced. And so you really have to keep the strong boundaries, even if this is a person that you might, like have attraction for. And for the sake of them having this therapeutic relationship long-term, really holding that very, very strong, and be aware of your own triggers, your own attractions, and holding theirs very lovingly, unconditionally, with presence, without shaming them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say it's totally normal and fine for clients to feel attraction to you. I mean, in many cases, we are showing up in their life as a very integrated human, bringing this unconditional love. We may have some real energetic information for them. I feel like attraction is really information. It's this desire to commune with a different level of consciousness, and so it's super normal to have that, and just to speak openly and clearly about it, and just keep redirecting them back to how does that feel for them, and what does that bring them into contact with in themselves. So so again, just holding those boundaries so clearly and continuing to make it about the client's own experience.
Thank you.
So,
keeping that very strong focus that you're here of service for them. They're paying you for a service, right? There's already an energetic transference with money. You've got, same way a masseuse doesn't massage necessarily for their pleasure. You're getting energetically paid. You're here to be present for them.
right.
I definitely want to make space now for questions and answers, so we have some time to get into that.
I know that was a lot of information. Thank you guys for hanging in there. So would love to go into some Q&A, hear how all that is landing with you. So I don't know, Courtney, do you have some questions?
Yes, I had a couple questions, but Frederica, did you want to speak to our presentation today?
Sure. Thank you, Courtney. Just briefly before we hop into Q&A, I wanted to thank Leslie and Jahan. We're going to have a rich moment of finding out what's rising up in all of you around this. I want to reiterate the framing of this workshop, which is that Leslie and Jahan are speaking from their own experience about their own practices and their own professional journey. This is not prescriptive, and this does not necessarily reflect the way that Synthesis approaches this topic. I think it would be very interesting and fruitful for us to get more into that in the coming weeks and months for those in our digital training program, and talk about the way in which we do approach this topic and it shows up on retreat. So just mindful of anything that might have felt like a prescription or a recommendation is Jahan and Leslie speaking from their own experience. Thank you, and let's pivot into Q&A.
Yes, thank you, Frederica. Thank you, Leslie and Jahan. So our first question is, could you please distinguish between Neo-Tantra and Classical Tantra? Because they've both been mentioned on this call and both go by the name Tantra, but they're very different from one another. So if you could talk about that, that would be great.
Totally. It is a complex topic. So classical Tantra and Neo-Tantra are basically two different things that are both, I would say that they're, they both have their own, beautiful teaching within them, but they're very different paths. So the classical Tantra path is it's an ancient practice, a spiritual practice system that is really about coming into full enlightenment, full connection with the divine, and really dives deeply into the kind of archetypal Shiva, Shakti, masculine, feminine forces, and integrating all those energies within our body. So it's a very complex spiritual practice that requires, serious spiritual commitment and finding a teacher that can guide you in that path. I'm happy to give some recommendations for books and teachers, things like that. Neo-Tantra is a path that's been around, over the last couple hundred years. People have developed this, based on classical Tantra and other kinds of sacred spirituality, sacred sexuality practices. But Neo-Tantra, as it's, if you go to like a Tantra workshop for couples or something, it's going to be more about, breathing into the body, finding the way to connect to your own pleasure that's really healing and wholesome. It's a lot of that, like connecting heart with sexuality and giving different practices, giving different tools for how people can integrate their sexuality into their life. Classical Tantra itself doesn't speak much about sexual practices per se, or if they did, it was in a very esoteric way. Neo-Tantra is a lot more of a sort of a modern path of connecting to one's sexuality with wholesomeness. So the two have little to do with each other, actually. So it's important to learn more about those.
Yeah, so, to riff on that too, definitely the classical Tantra has more of a cosmology and deep philosophical roots. And within that framework, as we've maybe shared through mysticism or psychedelic states, that the universe feels like it's one being, an organism, right? So there's one presence, one deep consciousness we're all part of. And at some point in its development from like the singularity, you can say it splits into two beings, two actual archetypal entities that run through us. One's masculine, one's feminine. You can say with the Hindu tradition, Shiva and Shakti. And she creates the entire manifest world. She is energy. She is movement. She is pleasure. She is emotion. She is change, right? In contrast, the masculine pole is a deep sense of present, focus, witnessing, death. He is the nothingness. So a lot of meditation traditions is like emptying until there's nothing in pure focus and presence, right? So that's a very masculine practice. While for her, it's dance and radiance, moving with her emotions and very being in touch with the moment as it's changing, while he's more like the eternal. So these are two forces that run through the entire cosmos, and the whole universe is seen as a sexual interplay between these two lovers. So that's a kind of a grounding in classical. While Neo-Tantra, people, I've heard it say, it was put forward started by Charles Muir. He started Source Tantra, has been teaching Tantra about 50 years, and he helped to bring it from the Eastern traditions to the West. As she mentioned, a lot more embodied practices, including things like sacred spot massage. So massaging the yoni internally to help release the trauma that's stored in the body. And also for the males, kind of anal penetration with fingers to release, just like our bodies, our muscles stores trauma and tension, so do our sexual organs, right? And by releasing those emotions there, we feel more vibrant and free.
Just in a nutshell,
Thank you for speaking to your studies and what's come up for you in these two subjects. Our next question is, what would be a good next step for a psychedelic practitioner to explore further training in this area from your experience of what you've found to be helpful? And then another question we have is if you could speak to more of your influences and how you've philosophically formed your ideas for how you're holding sexuality in your containers.
I think that studying the basics of classical Tantra would be really helpful for any practitioner to have just a foothold in this. I think that really the kind of sort of modern spiritual values that the Westerners seem to be holding today are really more of a sort of tantric path of coming down and into the body and into full connection with our human lives, as opposed to many of the spiritual traditions of the past that have been really like transcendent, like kind of go up and out of our human lives, go leave our humanity in order to reach the divine. I feel like what most of us are doing these days is really about bringing divine presence and awareness into our lives, into connection with every part of who we are. And I think studying a little bit of classical Tantra and those sorts of philosophies can really be helpful. And then in terms of exploring one's own sexuality, I mean, there's, worldwide, there's any number of different kinds of, Tantra communities, conscious sexuality practices, authentic relating, ecstatic dance, any kind of conscious dance spaces that allow you to be in your body in ways that connect to your emotions, that connect to your sensuality. There's so many opportunities within community to take different sorts of classes that will allow you to explore this energy. There's also, gazillions of sex coaches and empowerment coaches in that way. So if you need to do one-on-one work, that's also something that's totally available.
And also the really ones that stand in mind. So for classical, the kind of traditions largest called Kashmir Shaivism, and again, it's kind of grounding in the deep kind of cosmology and philosophy. Ultimately, it's a non-dual framework, right? That we're all one, but it's working within polarity. The same way we can see the yin and yang symbol, and like it's one kind of energetic dynamic force, but within it, it's being moved by polarity. So that's one way to engage it classically. In terms of more like the neo or new, some teachers that are very, for me, impactful and trainings, and just to frame, sometimes they're controversial, right? So just to let you know, like there might be controversy around some of these, but I still think there's some deep teachings that can be very good. David Data has been amazing. I think really understanding masculine and feminine forces and how sexuality rates to spirituality. Source Tantra with Charles Muir, as I mentioned, he's been teaching for like 50 years, like he's in his 80s now. He teaches on both coasts. And then I really have enjoyed ISTA, the International School of Temple Arts. I know recently it's been called out that two of their facilitators over the last few years weren't in complete integrity. That's been called out and worked with, but I think the school really has developed a very deep teaching when it comes to both practices and philosophy.
So proceed with caution. Every practitioner has their strengths and has their shadows. So any spaces like that you go into, it's like important to hold what's true for you and lean into the level of your comfort.
Thank you for sharing that. We have two more questions. One is around if you could speak a little bit more about the consent and agreement process that you go through with your clients, and how you educate them about the experience in more detail. And then coming off of it's similar to that, someone was curious about if speaking about your personal psychedelic sexual experiences as a practitioner, sorry, I lost my place, could be seen as more narcissistic than helping people to heal, and if it could create competitiveness and dissatisfaction. So if you could speak to that as well.
I didn't understand the last question. Yeah, go ahead. It said like how spiritual experiences can create narcissism. Is that the gist of it?
Let me read it word for word. So this person asks, could focusing at length on recounting your maximal sexual experiences be more narcissistic than helping people heal? Can it create competitiveness and dissatisfaction, rather like capitalistic creation of need?
I'll just say that I don't share with my clients around my own personal experiences. I may speak to sort of the like the power of these states. If sexual energy is something that they want to explore, I may say like, yeah, this has been a really beautiful path for me to get in touch with my own body. But I certainly wouldn't, set any kind of bar for them to try to reach or, anything like that could have them feeling less than or, I might just share about, the power of it and sort of leaning into where that energy might take them. And it's going to be really personal for them.
Totally. No, like very likewise. I don't share about much myself or experiences in the sense of like not withholding, but you're there for the client, right? So I share about myself only to the degree that I feel helps them feel safe, feel seen, create some deeper connection and rapport. But it's about them and not about you. So.
Yeah. And back to the question about setting boundaries and agreements. So for example, I have a client who is in his early 20s and he's dealing with childhood sexual trauma. And in his journey, he, ahead of time, we talked about kind of how, how that energy might arise, how I can support him in the session, like what he can expect. And I let him know very clearly that, for example, it would be okay with me if he wanted to take off his clothes. That would be totally welcome. If he wanted to self-pleasure, that would be something that would be welcome. I can either be in the space or I could leave the space. I let him know about the availability I have to do certain kinds of body work, getting energy flowing, helping him breathe, things like that, but that I wouldn't be doing any, hands-on sexual touch, like we wouldn't be engaging in sexual energy exchange. So he kind of knew where the boundaries were. He kind of knew like that there was a certain level of freedom for him to express himself and where my comfort level was. So going into it, he could let himself, be free to express how he needed to.
Thanks. And also to respond to the general framework of consent, what comes to my mind is a new book just came out called Creating Consent Culture by two authors that have been working on consent for 20 years. Names Marcia Basinski and Erica Scott. And they write consent culture is a way of being where interactions are collaborative and as mutually agreeable as possible. In consent culture, people feel control of their own bodily autonomy and boundaries. They are free to change those boundaries at any time according to their individual desires and needs. Consent culture is about having respect and compassion for ourselves and others. And just a small kind of tidbit is where we run into the edges of this definition is that consent is no longer allowed when people are in an altered state, right? So the idea that they can change their boundaries anytime no longer applies to this work. The boundaries must be set before the medicine is taken and then be held up through the rest of the entire session.
Thank you for elaborating on that. And I know that we're at time right now, so I just want to thank everyone for sharing. And thank Leslie and Johan for sharing and everyone for writing in about their questions. I really appreciate it. We'll have more information about what Johan and Leslie have shared on our